Today on Call for Two, a quick review of Rear Window, the board game. I'm Jesse. I'm here with Greg.
Thanks for having me on your channel.
It's great to have you here.
Good to be back.
Before we get started with the review, let's go down to the table and see how this game plays. Rear Window is a cooperative deduction game where, over the course of 4 rounds, one player attempts to communicate hidden information to the others using ambiguous picture cards. It was published in 2022 by Funko Games and designed by Prospero Hall, based on the 1954 movie of the same name by Alfred Hitchcock, and listed for ages 13 and up, 3 to 5 players on the box, but we think it works well at a 2-player count. It's got a short running time of 40 minutes. Play begins with one player taking on the role of the director. The director chooses 4 attribute tokens randomly from a set of 12 potential tokens. Advanced tokens may be chosen to increase the difficulty of the game. The director then randomly places these attributes behind their shield hidden from other players, 1 token in each of the 4 apartment spaces. They then choose 4 resident tokens, 1 for each apartment, pairing them with the attribute tokens. In this way, each of the apartments has a unique resident attribute pair. This is the information that the other players must discover by the end of round 4 in order for the team to win. At the start of each of the 4 rounds, the current day's board is flipped over and the director draws 8 cards depicting various people, places, and things. The director then places these 8 cards on the 8 spots on the current day's board, 2 in each apartment, with up to 2 cards being placed face down in order to not confuse the guessing players about irrelevant cards. The guessing players then cooperatively discuss the clue cards placed by the director and assign guesses to each apartment consisting of a resident and attribute token pair. At the end of the round, the director gives the players their score for that round, 1 point for each correctly placed token. Players also have 4 once-per-game special abilities they can use at any time to get hints. And the director has 3 opportunities over the course of the game to trade in their cards for replacement cards. After the end of the 4th round, if the players have correctly identified all 8 tokens, 4 residents and 4 attributes, then everyone shares a cooperative win. The game can also be played semi-cooperatively by shuffling a murder token in with the potential attribute tokens. If the murderer token is one of the 4 attributes drawn and placed in an apartment, special semi-cooperative rules are triggered where the director is trying to get the players to guess everything except which apartment has the murderer attribute, and players are trying to figure out which apartment has a murderer token instead of a normal attribute. If the murderer token was drawn, players win only if they get correctly at least 6 of the 8 resident and attribute tokens, as well as the murderer token. The director wins if players do not figure out the location of the murderer token, but get at least 6 other tokens correct.
Okay, well, let's firstly look at the art and components briefly. This is a Prospero Hall game, which is connected to Funko. And like always, I mean, this game is like a $30 game or somewhere in that range.
Cheaper.
Like most of their games, and you can buy it cheaper. But a lot of really good components, as always, for that price point, for more, essentially. But the art is evocative of the film. It's got some nice art, on the cards here. You've got nice cardboard for these kind of, which you could have just had, a card or something. So it's kind of nice to have those. And also nice cardboard for the board. And, it's, the art, it's very similar, as we'll speak about games like Dixit and stuff like that, have a very crazy art and stuff. And so the art is fine. It feels like it belongs all uniform. It's all a uniform look.
It feels a little bit like old-timey. There's an old-timey vibe.
I mean, the art isn't like too crazy, which is usually what you kind of expect in a game like this. But you got your apartment building, and then you have lots of neat little things like, you have like a little trunk that they didn't need to have in here to put things in, which is, a cool thematic tie, the little director's clip, and the building that looks like the building and stuff like that.
Two shields.
And, just some little cheats where you know that one of these pieces has to go here or here because of the shape, and some other functional things. And just the instruction booklet being, tied into the movie, and of course the 25 cent and everything. So I think they really did a really nice job with the production here, and especially for the price point, as I mentioned.
Yeah, and one really interesting thing we should say is that we did a playthrough of this, a 2-player playthrough. Now that's actually quite interesting because the game says 3 players or more. And I have already seen on Board Game Geek people saying, can I play this with my wife? Because it's a couple game. We played it. Spoiler alert, it works great at 2 players. I absolutely, there's no reason this couldn't be a good 2-player game.
Yeah, I mean, so couples and friends and things like I think it just has a 3-player thing specifically because it is nice to be able to talk to somebody and then the director can overhear what you're saying and stuff. And I think that you miss out a little bit on that. But if you want to be able to play it, it's definitely...
Well, it definitely benefits from hearing what the other player is thinking. You just have to have the other person verbalize what they were thinking.
So I will say this: I'm really a big fan of having friends over and having a nice dinner, thematic tie-in, watching a movie, and then playing a game. So this is a perfect opportunity. This is a movie I haven't seen in about 20 years. So to me, for $30 or whatever, have dinner with everybody. If you can tie it into the movie, that's even better. Play the game a couple times with some friends, and you're done. I mean, you could even just give it away, trade it away, let somebody take it home after dinner or whatever. That to me is like a very enjoyable experience.
I can't think of a better pairing of board game and movie than this. And also because it's so well suited to a larger group, like you could have 4 or 5 friends over. That's a perfect night.
So can I tie this into the theme a little bit since we're talking about that now? I think that, this is the whole, and this is not a spoiler, but the movie is essentially like, are you a busybody and you've got nothing to do and you're looking out the window and you've imagined this murder plot? Or have you actually witnessed a murder? And this game does have a mechanism that is could be a little controversial, I think.
I think we should talk about that later in the review.
It does definitely add this element of is there a murder or are you crazy? And I think it's a very clever way to make you guess about that and to thematically tie it in. And it really does feel like, using that sort of Dixit Mysterium Park type of thing that really works quite well for this specific game. And it really feels like if you're going to do with this night that I think that's a cool idea for, this game, it really knocks it's crazy as a theme to think hey, people really clamoring for a Rear Window board game, but it essentially works beautifully.
Yeah, thematically it ties in. These windows and the pictures are all looking through the windows. Everything does feel very thematic. So I thought we'd do something a little differently. Sometimes we've done little quick before you buy it reviews, trying to be compact. And then the other times we spend 2 hours talking about a game. I think we should do a little bit hybrid just to try something new and give our...
Yeah.
You want to get something else?
Well, I was going to say, I think if
I'll put it in context.
Put it in context of those games.
I'll put it in context, but I'm going to sort of give you my final thoughts early, and then maybe we'll discuss it. But for me, I feel like I've been walking around looking for a game like Mysterium Park, Mysterium, something that fits into this mold that works. And I've played all the ones I can get my hands on. There's Obscurio as well. Mysterium Park, we both agree, is sort of overwrought. That was very popular at one time. Mysterium, right? Then Mysterium Park came out, which we played on the channel. And it was okay. It was nice how simple and fast it was. But it didn't quite work. This one is the game that works for me. And the fact that when I played this, I was like, this is not going to work. It's not going to be fun. You're going to have cards and not know how to communicate. But we'll talk about why it works. But my bottom line is, this is the game I've been looking for to fit that niche. Mysterium Park can go out the window, right out these rear windows. Mysterium Park, Mysterium, those all go right out. This is the game that does it for me. Works, love it. If I had to rank it, I'd probably give it a 9. For that niche, that itch I want to scratch, this is it.
Yeah, to me, I would agree. I think Dixit is a very popular game, very, very popular game. And I always kind of felt it's pretty and it's neat. But essentially, I always kind of feel is it this card? Yeah, cool. Is it not? Okay, cool. Doesn't really matter. I don't have a lot of investment. I don't feel like I'll have a lot of choice in the matter, and so it's not really that exciting for me. And then when we played Mysterium, the original one, there was a great promise of how interesting this was going to be, and it was very overwrought and very fiddly, and it was a beautiful production. But Mysterium Park came out, and I was like, oh, it just got rid of the fiddliness, and it boiled down into elements, but it still comes down to like, does this work or does that work? Doesn't, it just didn't feel like it had a lot of control, and it was fine because it was a lot shorter and the more randomness and did you, or less control you have in a game, you need the game to be shorter, and so that kind of definitely kicked the other games out of the way for me. And now playing through this game, as we're playing through, I kind of felt like this is the same exact problem that I have with these other games.
In the beginning, you felt that way.
As we went along, I felt it was much more enjoyable, and I feel myself much more inclined to agree with Jesse, and that's really because of another game that they've borrowed heavily from, which is Mastermind. And maybe you want to talk about why that is.
Yeah, I mean, so you want to give this a number, or you don't want to do it?
I didn't really think of a number.
But you really like this game as well.
I don't know.
Okay, all right.
Well, you're really putting me on the spot, but yeah.
Okay, well, this is a review channel, Greg. This is what we do every time. It's not really putting you on the spot to ask for a rating.
I said, oh, so we're not going to do a rating on this one?
No, I didn't say that. Okay. All right. So let's talk. Now we've given our we've given the spoiler. We like it. Now let's talk a little bit about why it's so good. So you said Mastermind. That's what it does really feel like. That it's sort of a hybrid Dixit Mastermind. And one of the key things, if not the key thing, that makes.
I'm going to just jump in. Just to clarify, Mastermind. Is that what you're going to do or not?
Mastermind, yeah.
You were going to say this?
Yeah, Mastermind. Okay, you already said Mastermind.
No, but I was going to say...
you explain why? Okay,
so Mastermind essentially is a game where you put like four... you decide on four colors and how they're ordered, and then the player that you're playing against cannot see that information, and they'll guess at the code or that you've made. And you'll tell them how many they've gotten right and how many they're in the right place. And then through trial and error, you'll realize you'll hopefully crack the code before it's too long. And so this kind of does that same thing halfway.
It's that thing of being able to see your previous guess and figure out from that, oh, okay. And that's exactly what happens here. You have 4 days, 4 rounds, and you're trying to figure out doesn't change. So by the time you get up to that last day, you're looking back over all your past turns saying, well, if that was right and I got 3 things right, which 3 would it be? And this is a thinking person's game. You watch our playthrough. Greg is really piecing together the puzzle piece by piece, and that's really sets it apart from these other games.
Yeah, I think having that history, as you mentioned before, I think both the fact that you have some history that you think you can use deduction to say, well, I almost certainly have these 4 things right. Therefore, the 5th or 6th thing I had right could have changed the next round. And then, so you're looking both at the history of these items going forward, and you're also looking at the individual progression of each room going forward. And then I think you can't be too certain either, because just
that's
from
a lovely decision.
Availability of the possibility.
There's still okay. Let's not talk about the murder thing yet. But the other thing that's so fascinating is that if you take a game like Mastermind, right, which this has a lot in common.
Very simple game.
Yeah, you're guessing. I've picked something. You're guessing, and I'm trying to figure out. Now, once I put my thing, I'm out of the game. You're just guessing, and you just see the facts, and that lets you adjust. Something different is happening here. Greg makes his first guess. I give him the score, and then it's super important that I listen to everything that those players or one player is thinking, because I have to adapt what clues I give based on what things, like if he got something wrong, I have to know that and adjust what new clues I give. It is a collaborative, interactive game.
Yeah, I will say, for me personally, like games like Fury of Dracula, anything where like you're kind of setting your movement or whatever, like I really don't like being those characters. I find it to be kind of boring.
You only want to play one half of the game.
I think in this game, this might be a little bit better, maybe not as... Fury of Dracula is a whole other can of worms, but like this to me, like I would
you don't want to be this play this role. That's very interesting. I mean, that might be worth a video at one point. What role do you like in these kinds of games? Because I like playing this role.
I feel like you kind of set yourself, and then you're making some moves, but I think the meat of the game happens without you.
Well,
So if that's
I
if you
think
got two people for us it works out pretty well because Jesse
yeah.
enjoys that part. You like to run games and things like
I
you like
do.
to run a
I don't
you
need
like
to be
run a game
playing
of Werewolf,
them.
and to me I'm like that's
True. That's different. That's an interesting point. If you're buying this game, do you have a group of people that like to split those roles? But
it is short enough though. That's not that
it is very short. The setup's a little annoying in terms and putting away and taking out. But I think maybe this is a good segue to the decision points because what I find there are lots of parts about this game that are just bring joy in the mechanics and thinking about them, but the decisions on both players' parts are actually interesting in and of themselves. Like, in addition to making the things, like they've taken something like Mysterium Park and they've added these little decisions that are really quite nice. And one of them are these cards, which they each have 4 special powers. You have to decide when to use them. When you played, you used one strategy, use them early to lock in things, but you could try something different, wait until you really need it because you got to that last day and you couldn't. So they all work slightly differently. So you have to wrap your head, when should I use them and where and what day on what card?
Yeah, I think that as continuing our discussion, kind of our point made about Dixit and Mysterium Park and all that sort of thing, like this really feels like you do have a lot more decision points. You have a lot more control. Like, when do I use my power? You can use all of them on the first day, except for one you have to use at least. Or you can use all of them on the second day, I should say, because one of them will allow you. But you have to you can decide that. You can switch things. So it's. I feel like you have a lot more control. I think when the director has a little less control, you have a couple of tokens to decide whether to.
So there are a couple of decisions that the director makes that's quite interesting. First, right from the start, you put these things out randomly, but then you can choose which people to put where. That helps a little bit.
I forgot that in both games.
And then you've got 8. You have 8 cards, and you have to lay 8 cards down. Feels weird. Like you've got cards that feel wrong. Like this is going to give the wrong information. So it gives you a little choice there. You can put 2 face down, meaning like don't pay any attention. And then you've got the decision of where to put those 2, when to put them. Then you've got 3 times that you can trade in as many cards as you want. There's a little bit of push your luck there. Like, I've got a card that's not ideal, but boy, if I really don't have any good card, do I really want to trade in 8 or do I want to hold this one that's imperfect? And when to do that, that's quite fun. And then you've got a whole choice of listening to the other person and thinking, am I better off locking that one in definitively and then giving bad clues from something else, or giving mediocre clues everywhere? Those are fun choices to make.
And I will mention as well, I think one thing I have noticed about these Prospero Hall games is they're definitely more mass market. They're generally easier to comprehend. They're trying to appeal to a large audience, although a little more gamery than your Monopolies and Parcheesi's or whatever. But the one thing I do notice about this style of game, especially the cooperative games, is they tend to lean towards the easier side. And while I only played this a couple times, Jesse had a little more experience than I have had, but I tend to found in both games, I think we won both games that we played.
We won both games. It was a little touch and go at the end.
It was a touch and go at the end, but I do think that in general, they tend to run a little
that's
easier.
right. However, let me say this. You get out Mysterium Park, you basically can't play those on a hard level. But don't forget, this game has a whole set of advanced tiles that are much harder because they require you to get a combo of not just a single attribute, like who's fighting with who. Much harder. They ramp up the difficulty of the game significantly.
I thought they were just more esoteric concepts.
No, they're double tokens.
Interesting.
So you can play this on hard mode, absolutely.
Okay, well, then that's good. That's a great thing to see. That's an interesting. I wonder if they felt there was some feedback there from people playing their other games.
That's a very good question. But we almost forgot to talk about something that hasn't really come up in the games I've played or you've played, which is this murderer mechanic. And I'm sort of curious, one of the fun things about doing these videos with you, Greg, is it's kind of fun sometimes when we don't know what we're going to say. It's a very clever idea to take this purely cooperative game. Now, normally when you and I hear about a game being semi-cooperative, that's a bad sign. Like, I don't want to play semi-cooperative generally. But this is quite clever. It's sort of like introducing paranoia into the game. You mix these in, you probably won't have a murderer. But so everyone's playing cooperatively, it seems. But then at the end, the people who are guessing have to be like, is the reason I didn't figure this one apartment out because you're deliberately trying to throw me off? And the scoring thing is very clever. You still have to cooperate on almost everything else for either player to win. It's just that final piece.
Yeah, you can't just tank the game by making it impossible.
Which is brilliant. It's very clever. And I have a sort of different take on it. I'm going to hear your final thought, but let me just give you my sort of summary thought on it. For me, I love the paranoia that it adds, but I kind of like don't want it to actually be there.
Yeah, okay.
I sort of like the paranoia, but on the other hand, like it feels like if the players take it too seriously that there could be a murderer, then you may end up a little bit spoiling the game, because then you're like, I'm not going to try to figure out what it was because I'm going to conclude that you weren't giving me good clues. I like it a little better if you sit there and say, I have to figure out a pattern.
Yeah, I think, I mean, I mentioned this earlier, that I think that like it's completely necessary in this game because that's the thing that makes it Rear Window. If you didn't have that in there, you wouldn't have Rear Window. You would just have Dixit with this skin on it. To me, the murder thing is what makes it feel like the movie, which is what I like about it. I like the thematic tie. So I think you absolutely need that. That being said, like I think you have to play the game as if there's not one, and then when you get to the end, it does give you that extra little. It does add a little difficulty, and it adds a little uncertainty, and it makes like the final reveal a little more exciting, right? Because
it does make it a little more exciting.
And I mean, I agree with you. I think semi-cooperative games almost always are a bad mix. I think you got to have co-op or not cooperative, but this game does do a very good job of doing it. And again, I think like the game length and stuff are short enough where I think it's okay. And if you're like, it was a murderer,
I think that's a good point.
And it's the fact that you cannot say it's the murderer until the end of it forces you to kind of play the game as if you are trying to get it. So
that's a good point. That's a very good point.
So it actually is a very clever design. So
that's a very good point. Well, I want to agree with everything you said except one part.
Yeah. Which
is there are games where it's necessary for there to be the traitor or whatever. There's necessary that there be. I really think that if you're the kind of person that looks at that and says, my group won't have, my family, my kid, my son won't have fun with this idea that there's murder, and I really want us to really do it co-op. I think this game plays great if you took those murder tiles out. I don't think, like you said, thematically it's important. Yeah, I mean, but game-wise, mechanic-wise, you don't have to play with that. You could say, we're going to play this game, there is no murder, and it's a great game. So I do like the paranoia that it adds, but it is not necessary to have a great game.
Yeah, I think you would easily take that out. However, like if you want to play the experience, and I love theme. It's very important to me, but mechanisms in the gameplay is the most important thing to me. But I think in this case, I think you really be losing a lot in terms of that. But if if you've got some young kids, they've never heard of Rear Window and will never sit through this movie, then it doesn't matter.
Not even young kids, but
sure, anyway.
There's one other interesting thing. Some people on Board Game Geek have made variations that mess with that murderer token.
Oh, yeah?
Where you sort of find out at the end if there's a murderer. I forget exactly how they did it, but there's some, in Board Game Geek in the forums, you can post, variations on a game. And they've started to play with different ways that could come out. Like you get to the end and then you can decide to find out if there's a murderer. You could imagine all sorts of things you could do. Maybe you let them answer it, and if they get it wrong, then you have a point at which they can decide where there's a murder. Like that would be one way you could play it. Like try to get it right. If there's a murderer, you'll be wrong, and then get told you're wrong. That way you could play it 100% cooperatively, but then when you're wrong, you have a choice to make. Do you want to guess that there's a murderer, or do you want to fix something? There's lots of ways you could do it.
I think that the game...
Oh, you don't like that?
Well, I personally think like that it's nice that number one, it overcomplicates a game that is pretty streamlined for the most part. And I think the excitement comes when you're like, this is it. It's now or never. I get it, or I lose, and that's kind of, to me. And again, that's a personal opinion, but I think it works for what it is, and I think like sort of overcomplicating things. But I'm sure like for some groups that's the answer, and that's great to be able to have a forum for that.
Yeah. You might check out those I'm in love with this new idea I've proposed. This new variation I've come up with on the fly, where you try to get it right, and then if you're wrong, still hidden, then you have the tough decision to make. Do we now guess who's the murderer,
But then
or
it's
do we
gotta be
change
so,
our?
It's got
or
to
we
be
change
so
our
obvious
thing?
to find the murder. When you're like
don't
almost
know.
certain about 3 of the 4 of them.
Yeah, maybe. Well, it
Pretty
might not
easy,
work.
yeah.
Okay, but there you have it.
Okay.
There's our thoughts. Definitely playable without murderer, but the murderer adds something. So for me, this is a pure joy and a thinking person's Dixit deduction game.
Yeah.
Home run for
And
me.
we should point out that it's a pretty short game too. I mean, it's like I think we played
It
a game
is
in like
pretty
30
short,
or 40 minutes.
And
like,
we've discovered it's great at 2-player. I've played it 4. It's good at 4.
yeah, absolutely. I think you could play it. You could replace some of those other games and play it somewhat regularly.
Right out the rear window.
Or you could play it. Just have a fun night, movie and game night, and then be done with it in that way too. So that's I think we said it.
You've come up with your score. You said it was like 8.5, even though you
8.
didn't want to.
Yeah, I think it's at 8. 8.
All right. Well, thanks for joining me for this, Greg. Really a pleasure.
Yeah, great to be back.
Pleasure to play this with you.
Yeah.
And
hopefully that helps some people decide whether or not they should buy this at 2 or more, even, really.
Yeah, I can't say enough good about it. All right. We'll see you next time.
Oh, it's so funny.
It's just crazy that we're doing this here. I forgot how to
making
do
all
it.
the old mistakes again.
You are watching.
Pushing the fucking rock up the hill, and it falls back down.
Okay.
Why would you do that?
Is that where it was?
It was like here, right?
Okay. This is one of the worst games to put away. It's unfortunate.
I mean, I know I've talked to you about this before, but like all the inserts too, like pay for inserts. I'm like, I'll throw the insert away so that I can just bag everything and throw it in the box. Because it's like, it's so much easier than like having to be like the Zombicide games. You're like, no,
trying to fit them in their plastic little houses. Yeah, that's pretty painful. All right, well, that's going to be a shock to the system when they see this video.
Yeah, the 4 people that are like, hey, I remember that guy. Nobody cares.
A couple hundred people.
No one cares, Jesse.
They care.
Nobody cares.
They care.